Ancient civilizations held botanical secrets that could alter the very fabric of reality. We are about to uncover 30 profound examples of lost ancient botanical knowledge. By the end of this journey, you will see history not as a series of dates, but as a forgotten conversation between humanity and the green world. We will explore the plant that fueled Viking battle rage and the sacred brew that promised visions of the afterlife. What single piece of vanished plant wisdom do you think would change our world the most? The first whisper from the ancient world comes not from a stone tablet, but from the still waters of the Nile. Floating upon its surface was the sacred blue lotus, a flower of such profound importance that its image is woven into the very pillars of Egyptian civilization. This was no mere decoration. To the Egyptians, the blue lotus was a direct conduit to the divine, a living key to altered states of consciousness. Its petals, when steeped in wine or chewed, released gentle psychoactive compounds, inducing a state of serene euphoria and vivid, trance-like visions. In temple rituals, priests and priestesses would consume it to commune with the gods, to receive prophecies, and to symbolically reenact the daily rebirth of the sun god Ra, who was believed to have emerged from a giant lotus blossom at the dawn of creation. Look at any major artifact, from the golden burial mask of Tutankhamun to the frescoes lining royal tombs, and you will find the blue lotus cradled in the hands of deities, adorning banquet tables and gracing the brows of pharaohs as they transitioned to the afterlife. It was the scent of eternity, and here lies the core of our first lost knowledge. We have the art, we have the texts mentioning its use, and modern science has identified its mind-altering alkaloids. Yet the precise ceremonial recipes are gone. Was it a tea, a wine infusion, or an ointment? What specific chants or meditations accompanied its use to guide the visionary experience? The exact ritual context, the dosage that opened the gates of perception without harm, the full depth of its spiritual technology, has evaporated like mist from the Nile at dawn. We are left staring at the beautiful, silent image, forever separated from the transcendental experience it once granted. But the blue lotus was not confined to the temple's shadowy halls. Its power flowed into the very bloodstream of daily Egyptian life, blurring the lines between pharmacy, pleasure, and the mundane. Ancient papyri hint at its use as a versatile remedy, a botanical Swiss Army knife for common ailments. It was believed to soothe the stomach, ease headaches, and calm the nerves. More intimately, it was celebrated as a potent aphrodisiac, a key ingredient in perfumes and oils meant to stir desire. And as night fell, a simple infusion of its petals could serve as a gentle sedative, ushering in restful sleep free from the day's worries. This was a plant fully integrated into human well-being, from the sacred to the sensual to the simple need for a good night's rest. Yet herein lies the modern dilemma. The records are tantalizing but frustratingly vague. A hieroglyphic text might simply state, "Take the flower of the blue water for the pain in the head," with no further instruction. What exact part of the flower was used? Was it the petals, the stamens, or the root? What was the method of preparation? A cold maceration, a boiled decoction, or a paste mixed with honey? Most critically, when was it harvested? The potency of any plant can change dramatically based on the time of day, the season, even the phase of the moon. This granular, living knowledge was likely never written down. It resided in the hands and minds of the priestly herbalists, passed from master to apprentice through whispered words and demonstrated actions in the temple gardens. They knew the exact moment to pluck the bud at dawn when its compounds were most concentrated. They held the secrets of synergistic blends, perhaps combining the lotus with a pinch of another herb to enhance its effects or mitigate side effects. That oral tradition, that chain of tactile wisdom, was severed long ago. Today, scientists can isolate the lotus's active chemicals in a lab, but they are attempting to reconstruct a symphony with only a few scattered notes. The full recipe, the conductor's score, is lost. We are left with the echo of a cure, but not the cure itself. The disappearance of the blue lotus left a spiritual void, but another plant vanished with such finality that it collapsed an entire economy. Journey from the Nile to the sun-baked coast of North Africa to the Greek colony of Cyrene. Here, growing wild on the arid hillsides, was a plant so valuable it was worth its weight in silver. They called it silphium. This was not a humble herb but a towering giant fennel, a botanical unicorn that refused to be domesticated. The Cyrenians built their legendary wealth entirely upon its golden resin. Caravans laden with this precious sap snaked across the desert, destined for the kitchens and apothecaries of Athens, Rome, and beyond. To the ancient world, silphium was a miracle. Its sharp, savory juice was a culinary marvel, the ultimate seasoning that could elevate the simplest dish. As a medicine, its reputation was boundless. Physicians prescribed it for coughs, sore throats, fever, indigestion, and even the removal of warts. It was a panacea, but one use overshadowed all others. Silphium was renowned as the most effective contraceptive and early abortifacient of the ancient world. Historical accounts from Soranus to Pliny the Elder describe a simple regimen. Women would drink a small portion of its resin mixed with water once a month to prevent pregnancy. Its reliability was so famed that it became synonymous with safe love, a biological guarantee in a world without modern medicine. This profound association is etched into history through a simple shape. The seed pod of the silphium plant was distinctively heart-shaped. This pod, the very source of its reproductive power, was stamped onto the gold and silver coins of Cyrene as the city's emblem. Scholars now widely believe this ancient symbol of love and fertility is the direct ancestor of the heart shape we scribble on notes and send in texts today. A lost plant gave us the universal icon of the human heart. Yet this heart-shaped source of wealth and security vanished from the earth completely and forever. The extinction of silphium stands as one of history's most poignant botanical mysteries, a disappearance so total it feels deliberate. By the 1st century of the Common Era, the great Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote its obituary, declaring that within his lifetime only a single stalk had been found, and it was promptly sent to the Emperor Nero as a curiosity. What powerful force could erase a plant of such immense value from its native soil? The leading suspect is, unsurprisingly, humanity itself. Roman demand was insatiable. As the empire's elite developed a taste for its unique flavor and relied on its medicinal properties, the harvest became a frenzy. The plant was tapped for its resin, its roots were dug up for propagation attempts, and its stalks were cut for food. This was a classic case of overexploitation, a tragedy of the commons playing out on the arid hills of Cyrene. The locals, growing rich from the trade, may have failed to implement sustainable practices, watching their golden goose be plucked to extinction. But human greed is only one thread in this mystery. Climate whispers another possibility. Silphium grew in a very specific, narrow coastal region. What if a prolonged drought, a subtle shift in rainfall patterns, or a series of devastating storms altered that delicate ecosystem just enough? The plant, already stressed by overharvesting, might have lost its final foothold, its seeds failing to germinate in soil that was no longer the home it remembered. The most tantalizing theory, however, lies in the plant's own stubborn nature. Despite the Romans' best efforts, silphium famously resisted all attempts at cultivation. It thrived only in the wild. This suggests its life cycle depended on a complex, unseen relationship with its environment. Perhaps it required a specific pollinator, a unique soil fungus, or a particular grazing pattern by native animals to trigger its germination. The ancient farmers, lacking this ecological knowledge, simply could not recreate the symphony of conditions it needed to grow. They were trying to domesticate a wild spirit. So, was it overharvesting, climate change, or a fatal incompatibility with human agriculture? The truth likely lies in a devastating combination of all three. The final, haunting layer of this loss is that we do not even know exactly what silphium was. No definitive specimen exists in any ancient herbarium. Was it a species of ferula, a cousin of giant fennel? Was it a completely unique genus that left no descendants? Modern botanists still debate its identity, examining ancient coins and vague descriptions like detectives at a cold case scene. The secret of its cultivation, the precise alchemy that made it so effective, died with the last Cyrenian herbalist who knew where to find it on the hillside. We lost not just a plant, but a pillar of ancient life, and with it, the answer to a heart-shaped mystery. While silphium's extinction was a public tragedy, another botanical secret was so fiercely guarded that its keepers chose oblivion over disclosure. For over 1,000 years, in a sacred complex just outside Athens, one of the ancient world's most profound spiritual experiences unfolded in absolute secrecy. These were the Eleusinian Mysteries, an annual initiation rite dedicated to the goddesses Demeter and Persephone. Thousands of Greeks, from humble farmers to philosophers like Plato, underwent this 9-day journey, culminating in a single, transformative night within the great hall called the Telesterion. What they witnessed there was so powerful, so life-altering, that every single initiate emerged sworn to never reveal the sacred secrets on pain of death. And to this day, not one of them ever broke that vow. The central catalyst for this transcendent vision was a humble, sacramental drink known as kykeon. Ancient texts describe it as a simple barley gruel flavored with pennyroyal mint, a common peasant's meal. But to believe it was merely food is to miss the mystery entirely. This concoction, consumed at a precise moment in the ritual, was the key that unlocked the gates of perception. It promised initiates not just philosophical insight, but a direct, awe-inspiring vision of the afterlife, a glimpse of the eternal that forever banished the fear of death. The known ingredients are trivial. Barley and mint could be found in any Greek kitchen. It is the unknown component, the one whispered about but never written, that holds the secret. What potent substance was mixed into that common gruel to catalyze a collective mystical experience so profound it shaped the spiritual foundation of Western civilization? Modern scholarship points to a compelling and controversial suspect, ergot. This is a fungus that can infect grains like barley and rye. Under certain conditions, ergot produces alkaloids that are the chemical precursors to lysergic acid diethylamide or LSD. If the priests of Eleusis knew how to cultivate, harvest, and prepare ergot-infected barley in a specific way, they could have created a powerful, naturally occurring psychedelic brew. The effects align eerily with ancient descriptions: vivid, dreamlike visions, a sense of unity with the divine, and profound emotional catharsis. The initiates spoke of seeing a great, blinding light and hearing a sacred sound. This could very well be the neurological fingerprint of a potent psychoactive experience, but the ergot theory is fraught with danger. Ergot is notoriously unpredictable. In different strains or preparations, it can cause horrific physical symptoms known as St. Anthony's fire, burning sensations, gangrene, convulsions, and death. There is no record of mass poisonings at Eleusis. This suggests an astonishing level of botanical precision. The priests must have possessed a deep, empirical understanding of the fungus. They would have needed to identify the exact strain of ergot, know the precise stage of growth to harvest it, and master a meticulous preparation method, perhaps a cold water extraction, to isolate the visionary compounds while leaving the toxic ones behind. This was not accidental pharmacology. This was a refined, ritualized technology, yet it remains a theory. Perhaps the secret ingredient was not ergot at all, but another, now vanished plant. Could it have been an extract from a specific Mediterranean herb, long since lost to history or misidentified in our modern catalogues? a plant whose psychoactive properties were known only to that specific priesthood, cultivated in a hidden garden within the sanctuary walls. The true recipe for kykeon was a secret of state, protected by the most severe penalty imaginable. When the Roman Emperor Theodosius outlawed pagan rites in the 4th century, he ordered the sanctuary at Eleusis destroyed. The last hierophant, the high priest who alone knew the full secret, took it with him to his grave. He chose to let the knowledge die rather than see it profaned. So we are left with the testimonies of the transformed, the awe in their words, the peace they carried, and the frustratingly simple list of ingredients on a papyrus scrap. The precise alchemy that turned barley, mint, and a mystery component into a gateway to the divine is gone. The priests of Eleusis succeeded too well. Their secret is eternally safe. From the silent sanctuary of Eleusis, our search for lost botanical wisdom turns eastward to the dawn of civilization in ancient India. Here, the mystery is not whispered in secret rites, but shouted from the heavens in some of humanity's oldest poetry. The Rig Veda, a sacred text composed over 3,000 years ago, sings the praises of a deity that was also a drink, soma. More than a mere plant, soma was a god incarnate, a celestial being whose essence was pressed, filtered, and consumed in the most sacred of Vedic rituals. The hymns dedicated to it are ecstatic, describing a liquid that could unleash superhuman strength, grant visions of brilliant light, heal all illnesses, and bestow a taste of immortality itself. It was the divine catalyst that allowed the priests, the rishis, to commune directly with Indra, Agni, and the pantheon of gods. To drink soma was to become invincible, enlightened, and divine. Yet, for all its glorious description, the true identity of the soma plant vanished from practical knowledge over 2 millennia ago, leaving behind perhaps the greatest botanical detective story in history. The descriptions in the Rig Veda are vivid but poetically elusive. The plant is said to have no leaves, flowers, or fruit. Its stem is described as tawny or reddish, and it grows in the high mountains. The juice, when extracted, is a brilliant, intoxicating gold. After consuming it, the poets speak of feeling an immense surge of power, a clarity of mind that could comprehend the universe, and a radiant, fearless joy. This was not a gentle meditation aid, it was a draught of divine fury and ecstasy. For over 2 centuries, scholars, botanists, and ethnobotanists have argued over what real plant could possibly fit this celestial resume. The leading candidate for many years has been the fly agaric mushroom, Amanita muscaria, with its iconic red cap and white spots. When prepared correctly, its psychoactive compounds can indeed produce states of exhilaration and altered perception. It grows in mountainous northern regions, and its stem fits a certain description, but there are problems. The Rig Veda speaks of pressing the plant to extract a juice, a process not typical for mushrooms. Furthermore, the effects described seem more stimulating and visionary than the often dreamlike, dissociative state associated with fly agaric. Another strong contender is a group of plants from the genus Ephedra, small, leafless shrubs that thrive in arid, high-altitude regions. Ephedra contains ephedrine, a powerful stimulant that could certainly produce feelings of immense energy and vitality, aligning with the strength-giving properties of soma. Yet, ephedrine does not typically induce the profound, visionary states or the sense of poetic inspiration so central to the hymns. The search has also considered everything from Syrian rue to cannabis to the blue lotus itself, but no single candidate perfectly matches every clue in the ancient texts. This has led some to propose a heartbreaking possibility: that the original soma plant was a unique species, driven to extinction by its own sacred status. Imagine a plant so revered, so central to ritual, that it was harvested without mercy from its limited mountain habitat. If it resisted cultivation like silphium, its fate would have been sealed. The last priests who knew its true form would have watched it disappear from the earth, leaving only poetry in its place. The loss is twofold. We have lost the plant, but we have also lost the intricate ritual technology that transformed it from a simple botanical specimen into a god. The preparation of soma was an elaborate, days-long ceremony. The stems were crushed between stones, the juice was filtered through woolen cloths, mixed with other ingredients like milk or barley, and fermented. Each step was accompanied by precise chants and actions, a sacred recipe where the intention and the method were as important as the ingredient itself. This was not a haphazard brewing. It was a precise alchemical ritual likely designed to extract certain alkaloids, mitigate toxins, or create synergistic effects. The exact sequence, the specific tools, the accompanying mantras, this entire ceremonial protocol died with the Vedic priesthood when the use of the original plant ceased. Later Hindu tradition replaced the physical soma plant with symbolic substitutes, like the moon or a blend of other herbs, acknowledging that the true, tangible connection to the divine had been severed. We are left with the most beautiful user manual ever written, praising a product we can no longer identify, crafted by a process we can no longer replicate. The god has left the building, and only its echo remains in the hymns. The search for soma leads us from cosmic hymns to a more intimate, perilous kind of magic, found not in a temple but in a witch's hall. In the heart of Homer's Odyssey, the hero Odysseus faces a threat more insidious than any monster. On the island of Aea, the enchantress Circe awaits, her wand capable of turning men into swine with a mere touch. When Odysseus's crew falls victim to her spell, he alone is saved by a divine gift. The messenger god Hermes appears, handing him a mysterious plant called moly. Homer describes it with precise, haunting detail. It had a black root and a milk-white flower, and the god tells Odysseus it is a plant of great virtue, one that no mortal man could ever dig up from the earth. This is our next lost botanical knowledge, a protective charm woven directly into epic poetry. The magic of moly was absolute. Odysseus, instructed by Hermes, chooses the root and then approaches Circe. When she strikes him with her wand and commands him to the pigsty, her magic slides right off him. The herb creates an invisible shield, neutralizing her transformative power and allowing Odysseus to overcome her. This is not a plant that grants strength or visions. Its power is purely defensive, a botanical antidote to enchantment. The description is so specific: black root, white flower, divine origin, that for centuries it has begged the question, was moly based on a real plant with real properties that the ancient Greeks viewed as magically protective? Scholars have long hunted for moly in the fields and forests of the Mediterranean. The most compelling candidate is the common snowdrop, a small, delicate flower of the genus Galanthus. On the surface, the fit is intriguing. The snowdrop has a white, drooping flower and, more importantly, a dark bulb that could be poetically described as a black root. It emerges in late winter, often pushing through snow, a symbol of purity and resilience, but the connection goes deeper than appearance. For millennia, extracts from snowdrop bulbs have been used in folk medicine across Eastern Europe and Asia Minor. Traditional healers employed it for a range of neurological conditions, including pain, headaches, and even memory loss. In the 20th century, modern science isolated an alkaloid from snowdrops called galantamine, which is now a licensed pharmaceutical treatment for Alzheimer's disease. It works by enhancing communication between nerve cells in the brain. Now consider this through an ancient lens. If a plant was known to heal ailments of the mind, to sharpen memory or clear confusion, what might that look like to a culture that understood illness as a form of spiritual affliction or magical attack? A substance that could fortify the mind against degeneration might easily be mythologized as a shield against a spell that robbed men of their reason and humanity, turning them into beasts. Circe's magic did not just change their bodies, it clouded their minds, making them forget who they were. A neuroprotective plant would be the perfect antidote. So, was the mythical moly an exaggerated memory of snowdrop? its real medicinal power transformed over centuries of storytelling into a divine charm against witchcraft. Yet the mystery is layered. Homer insists that moly could not be dug up by mortal hands, marking it as something beyond ordinary human acquisition. This could be pure mythological flourish, emphasizing its divine nature. Or it could hint at a practical danger. Some potent medicinal plants are also highly toxic if harvested or prepared incorrectly. The snowdrop bulb, for instance, contains other compounds that can cause nausea and digestive distress if not properly processed. The knowledge of how to safely harvest and prepare it might have been a closely guarded secret of ancient herbalists, making it effectively impossible for the common person to use safely. That specialized knowledge passed from master to apprentice would have seemed like a kind of magic. Over time, as the precise use faded, only the legendary, magical description remained in the epic. The true identity of Homer's moly is likely forever lost in the fog between observation and myth. We are left with a poetic fossil, a detailed description of a plant that served as the ultimate plot device in one of humanity's oldest stories. It reminds us that our ancestors often encoded real, observed power, whether medicinal, psychological, or toxic, into the language of enchantment. The snowdrop theory offers a beautiful bridge between the two, suggesting that the root of magic is sometimes just a root waiting for its story to be told. The heart-shaped emblem of Silphium may have vanished from the earth, but its ghost lingered on Roman palates for centuries. When the last stalk was harvested, it left behind a craving, a culinary void that demanded to be filled. The Romans called the precious resin of the Silphium plant Lasapicium, and it was the cornerstone of their most sophisticated cuisine, a flavor so integral that its absence was a cultural crisis. In a desperate attempt to replicate it, they turned to a botanical cousin, a different species of ferula plant that grew in the mountains of Persia and Afghanistan. From its roots, they extracted a pungent, sticky resin known as asafoetida. While it filled the physical gap in the spice trade, it was a poor imitation, a shadow of the original glory. The name itself tells the story. Asafoetida translates quite literally to stinking gum, where true Lasapicium was described as having a complex, savory aroma with hints of leek and celery. Asafoetida in its raw state is brutally pungent, releasing a sulfurous, garlicky odor so powerful it must be stored in airtight containers. Cooks learned to use it in minute quantities, often fried in oil to mellow its edge, where it could provide a savory, umami depth reminiscent of onions or garlic. But this was a compromise, not a replacement. The specific, celebrated taste profile of Lasapicium, that unique flavor which elevated a simple dish to a feast worthy of an emperor, was gone forever. Imagine a world where the single most important spice in your culture, a flavor woven into your identity, simply disappears. Roman chefs and gourmets were left with a strong, one-note substitute for a symphony they could no longer remember. The economic and cultural gap was staggering. Silphium had been a status symbol, a luxury that defined wealth and refinement. A single pound of its resin was worth as much as a soldier earned in a year. Asafoetida, while still traded along long routes, never commanded that same mythic value or cultural cachet. It was a practical solution, a culinary prosthetic. We can still buy asafoetida in markets today, and it remains a vital ingredient in many South Asian cuisines, valued for its digestive properties and savory punch. But when we smell its sharp aroma, we are not smelling the lost Lasapicium. We are smelling the ghost of a ghost, a pungent reminder of a flavor so exquisite that an empire mourned its passing and could only find this faint, garlicky echo in its place. That garlicky echo of Silphium lingers in the air, a testament to how deeply a lost flavor can haunt a culture. But what about a lost dream? Our journey now takes us across the Atlantic to the highlands of ancient Mexico, where the Aztecs cultivated a relationship with the dream world as a sacred landscape. They possessed a botanical key to this realm, a plant they called zakatachichi, the leaf of the god. Known to science as Callia ternifolia, this humble shrub was revered not as a mere sedative but as a powerful onerogen, a dream-generating tool. Its bitter leaves, when prepared as a tea or smoked before sleep, were believed to open a conduit to the divine, inducing dreams of exceptional clarity, vividness, and most importantly, prophecy. For the Aztec Tizitl or healer priest, a dream was not a random neurological event. It was a message, a diagnostic tool, a map of the soul's terrain, or a glimpse of future events. Zakatachichi was the technology they used to dial into that frequency with intention. The profound loss here is not the plant itself. You can still purchase zakatachichi online today, often marketed as a simple herbal supplement for lucid dreaming. What vanished in the cataclysm of the Spanish conquest was the intricate ceremonial framework that gave the plant its true meaning and power. The Aztec approach was holistic, a perfect example of set and setting being integral to the experience. The ritual likely began with purification, a sweat bath, fasting, or sexual abstinence to prepare the body and mind as a clean vessel. Specific prayers would be offered to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god of destiny and sorcery, or to the dream spirit itself, petitioning for clear vision and protection. The dosage and preparation were precise, perhaps combined with other sacred plants like tobacco or ololiuqui, the morning glory seed, to create a synergistic blend that guided the dreamer's journey. The physical setting mattered immensely. The dreamer wouldn't just drink the tea and climb into any bed. They would retreat to a designated sacred space, a quiet temple chamber or a secluded hut devoid of everyday distractions, a container specifically consecrated for the purpose of receiving visions. Then, upon waking, the most critical phase began, the interpretation. This was not a solitary, introspective act. The dreamer would recount every detail, every symbol, every emotion of the dream to the trained Tizitl. The priest would then decode this narrative using a vast, culturally shared symbolic language, connecting the dream's imagery to the complex Aztec calendar, omens, diagnoses of illness, or guidance for community decisions. A dream of a jaguar might mean one thing in the month of the flint knife and something entirely different in the month of the falling fruit. This interpretive lexicon, developed over centuries of careful observation and tradition, was a sophisticated science of the subconscious. When the Spanish dismantled the Aztec priesthood, burned their codices, and suppressed their rituals, this entire system was shattered. The physical plant survived, but the manual for its use, the prayers, the protocols, the symbolic dictionary, was systematically destroyed or driven underground. Today, someone might brew zakatachichi tea and experience unusually vivid dreams, but they are navigating that potent landscape without a map, without a guide, and without a shared cultural language to understand what they are seeing. The leaf remains, but the god who spoke through it has fallen silent, its voice drowned out by the silence of a lost world. From the silent dream temples of the Aztecs, we cross back to the marble halls of Greek medicine, where the quest for botanical mastery took a more systematic, yet equally elusive turn. Here, the dream was not of prophecy, but of perfection, a single, ultimate remedy that could cure any disease. They called this mythical cure the panacea, and its pursuit defined the work of legendary physicians like Dioscorides. In the 1st century of the Common Era, Dioscorides compiled his monumental work, De Materia Medica, a 5-volume encyclopedia detailing the properties of over 600 plants, minerals, and animal substances. It became the foundational text of Western pharmacology for the next 1500 years. Yet, within its meticulous pages lies a profound paradox. While Dioscorides catalogued individual herbs with remarkable accuracy, the true pinnacle of his art, the complex, synergistic formulas that aimed at that universal cure remains shrouded in mystery. The panacea was never meant to be a single, magical root. It was conceptualized as a masterful polyherbal formulation, a botanical orchestra where each ingredient played a specific note to restore the body's harmony. Recipes for such supreme remedies were legendary, passed down among master physicians and often kept secret. They called for rare ingredients gathered from the edges of the known world, a resin from a tree that only grew on a specific mountain in Armenia, a moss harvested from the north-facing side of an ancient temple stone, or the gall of a fish caught during a particular phase of the moon. The loss we face is not of the ingredients themselves, many of which we can still identify today. The loss is in the protocol, the intricate and sacred process that transformed a list of plants into a revered panacea. Consider the timing. A true master formula demanded harvesting each component at a precise astrological hour. Roots for a strengthening remedy might be dug at dawn under the sign of Leo, associated with vitality, while flowers for a calming elixir were plucked at dusk under the gentle influence of Venus. This wasn't mere superstition, it was an empirical observation of nature's rhythms, a belief that the potency of a plant was tied to cosmic cycles. Then came the preparation, a ritual in itself. Ingredients weren't simply tossed into a pot. They had to be processed in a specific sequence, some bruised, others finely powdered, certain resins dissolved in aged wine before being blended with decoctions that had simmered for exactly 3 days. The mixing might be done in a vessel of silver for cooling properties or of bronze for ailments of the blood. Each step was a deliberate act of alchemy, where the method was as medicinal as the materials. We have fragments of these recipes, references in later medieval texts that copied and corrupted the originals. But the complete, original formulas with their exact proportions, their precise instructions for planetary alignment, and their accompanying chants or intentions have not survived. What's missing is the conductor's score for that botanical orchestra. We have most of the instruments, but we no longer know the exact tempo, the dynamics, or the secret cues that made the symphony heal. Modern science can analyze each herb in a lab, identifying active compounds, but it struggles to replicate the holistic synergy of these ancient blends. The whole was truly greater than the sum of its chemically isolated parts. The quest for the panacea represents a lost body of knowledge that viewed healing not as a chemical intervention, but as a sacred art, a meticulous realignment of the human body with the ordered cosmos, using plants as the intermediaries. That philosophical and practical framework is the true panacea that has slipped through our fingers. The meticulous formulas of Greek physicians sought to cure the body, but an entire civilization in the American Southwest mastered the art of feeding itself against impossible odds. High on the arid mesas and within the deep canyons, the ancestral Pueblones, often called the Anasazi, built a thriving society in a land of brutal scarcity. Their genius was not in stone architecture alone, but in the very seeds they placed in the earth. Alongside their famous maize, they cultivated a suite of hardy, native grains that modern eyes would scarcely recognize as crops. They grew little barley, a resilient grass that could thrive on minimal water. They harvested amaranth and varieties of panic grass, plants that could endure scorching sun and poor soil. This was a sophisticated, localized food system fine-tuned over centuries to the desert's harsh rhythm. The loss we face here is not of a single sacred plant, but of entire agricultural libraries, dozens, perhaps hundreds, of unique, drought-adapted crop varieties and the deep cultural knowledge of how to make them flourish. When a prolonged mega-drought and social upheaval led to the dispersal of these communities from their great houses in the 13th century, something profound happened. As people migrated and integrated with other groups, they gradually abandoned their most specialized, place-specific crops. These native grains, so vital to survival in one particular canyon, held less value in a new environment or alongside different agricultural traditions. The seeds were not planted the next season, The knowledge of when to sow them, how deep to bury them in the sandy soil, which companion plants would shield them from pests, and how to process their tiny, tough seeds, all that intricate data, passed from elder to child for generations, simply stopped being used. It faded from memory, outcompeted by the arrival of old-world staples like wheat and barley, which were backed by the agricultural practices of colonizing cultures. This is a catastrophic deletion from humanity's culinary and climatic playbook. Today, as we face our own era of climate uncertainty, we are desperately searching for drought-resistant crops. Plant scientists scour seed banks and wild relatives of wheat, trying to breed resilience back into our food supply. Yet, the Anasazi had already done that work for us. They had, through generations of selective saving, essentially engineered superbly adapted varieties right there in the desert. Little barley wasn't just a grass, it was a genetic blueprint for survival in a drying world. We have lost the very plants that could teach our modern crops how to endure. The empty granaries of Cliff Palace hold more than just echoes. They hold the ghost of a solution we are now struggling with all our technology to reinvent. The Anasazi's forgotten grains represent a loss of practical sustenance, but some botanical knowledge was so sacred its purpose was purely symbolic, designed to bridge heaven and earth. In the deep oak forests of ancient Gaul and Britain, the Celtic Druids performed a ritual so precise, so charged with meaning, that its full understanding died with them. Their sacred plant was mistletoe, but not the common variety found on apple trees. They sought only the rare mistletoe that grew upon the mighty oak, a phenomenon considered a direct sign from the gods. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder recorded a breathtaking account of this ceremony, a snapshot of a knowledge system he could observe but never truly comprehend. On the 6th day of the moon, white-robed Druid priests would lead a procession to a chosen oak. A sacred white bull was tethered beneath its branches. Then, with a sickle made of gold, a metal considered too pure and celestial to corrupt the sacred plant, a priest would carefully cut the mistletoe from the oak, ensuring it never touched the ground. It was caught in a white cloth, for contact with earth would drain its divine power. The plant was then ritually sacrificed and a potion was prepared from it, hailed as a cure for infertility and a sovereign antidote to all poisons. Pliny's description is vivid, but it is merely the outer shell of a profound inner truth. The lost knowledge here is the entire symbolic and practical universe that gave this ritual its power. Why the 6th day of the moon? The Druids tracked lunar cycles with meticulous care, believing the moon's waxing light directly infused the mistletoe with increasing potency. Harvesting at that precise moment captured the plant at its peak of celestial energy. The golden sickle was not just for purity, gold was associated with the sun. The ritual thus married solar and lunar symbolism, uniting the two great lights of the sky in the act of harvesting a plant that lived between heaven and earth, rooted not in soil but in the limb of a tree. The white bull and white cloth symbolized purity and the otherworld, creating a ritual container to handle a substance considered too potent for the mundane world. But what were the exact words of the chants that were sung? What specific prayers invoked the oak spirit and thanked the gods for this gift? The medicine prepared was legendary, but the recipe is gone. Was the mistletoe crushed, boiled, or fermented? Was it mixed with dew collected at dawn, or with oak bark, or some other now unknown herb to activate or temper its properties? Mistletoe berries are toxic, and the line between cure and poison would have been perilously thin. The Druids undoubtedly possessed that precise knowledge, gained through generations of guarded experimentation. They saw the mistletoe as the soul of the oak, the tree's immortal essence made visible in the dead of winter when the oak stood bare. It was a symbol of life in death, of regeneration, and of a direct conduit to the divine. This entire body of lore, the calendrical science, the liturgical poetry, the medicinal formulations, was transmitted solely through an oral tradition of immense rigor that could take 20 years of study to master. When the Roman Empire systematically dismantled the Druidic orders, burning their sacred groves and outlawing their practices, this vast, unwritten library was extinguished. The fragments that survived, like Pliny's account, are tantalizing but mute. We see the silhouette of the ritual, but the breath that gave it life, the whispered chants, the intent behind each gesture, the full depth of its healing magic, is silent forever. The mistletoe we hang in doorways today is a faint, decorative echo of a plant that was once believed to hold the very heartbeat of the forest. High in the Andes, the Inca Empire solved the puzzle of survival with a single, humble tuber. Theirs was a civilization built upon the potato, but not the simple brown spud we know today. The Incas were master geneticists of the earth, cultivating a staggering diversity over 3,000 distinct varieties of potato. They grew potatoes in every conceivable form: tiny, marble-sized ones that burst with flavor, large, knobby ones perfect for stews, and varieties in shades of purple, red, yellow, and blue, each with its own texture and nutritional profile. This was not random. It was a breathtakingly sophisticated agricultural strategy, a living library of food security encoded in DNA. For every microclimate on their mountainous terrain, from frosty high-altitude plains to sun-drenched valleys, the Incas had developed a specific potato variety genetically tailored to thrive. One type could resist the biting frost, another could grow in thin, rocky soil, and a third might be naturally resistant to a particular blight. They even engineered potatoes with different levels of bitterness. Some were sweet and ready to eat, while others, packed with natural toxins, were processed into a long-lasting food called chuño. This process was a stroke of genius. They would spread these bitter potatoes on the high plains to freeze solid under the cold night sky, then thaw them under the intense daytime sun. Villagers would trample them to squeeze out the water, repeating the cycle over days. The result was a lightweight, freeze-dried potato that could be stored for a decade or more, an ancient astronaut food that fed armies and sustained cities through lean years. The catastrophic loss came with the Spanish conquest. The Europeans saw agriculture through a monoculture lens. They valued uniformity and yield, not a sprawling, rainbow-colored tapestry of specialized tubers. They introduced a handful of European potato varieties and imposed their farming methods, dismissing the Inca system as primitive. The intricate knowledge of which potato to plant where and why began to vanish. As Andean communities were disrupted, countless unique cultivars were simply not replanted. The genetic heritage of thousands of potatoes, each a unique solution to a specific environmental challenge, was erased. We are left with a tragic irony. The very lack of diversity the Spaniards encouraged made the potato vulnerable to the blight that would later cause the Irish potato famine. The Incas had already bred the solution to such a disaster across thousands of varieties, but that vast botanical library had already been burned, its most precious volumes lost forever. We saved the potato, but we lost the encyclopedia of its possibilities. The Incas' potato library was a fortress of food security, but another ancient civilization sought a botanical secret that promised to conquer not hunger but death itself. Across the world, in the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, the world's oldest epic poem tells of a quest for the ultimate prize. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the legendary king, shattered by the death of his friend Enkidu, embarks on a desperate journey to find the plant of heartbeat, a thorny herb that grows at the bottom of the sea and grants eternal youth. Gilgamesh retrieves it, only to have it stolen by a serpent while he rests, a poignant metaphor for humanity's eternal struggle against mortality. This mythical herb was not pure fantasy. Assyrian and Babylonian medical texts inscribed on countless clay tablets are filled with references to powerful plants with godlike names, suggesting a deep, real-world belief in botanical substances of extraordinary power. The lost knowledge here is twofold: the true identity of the plants that inspired these myths, and the entire mythological framework that turned a root or a leaf into a divine agent. The herb of immortality was likely a fusion of several real, potent botanicals whose reputations grew into legend. One strong candidate is licorice root. In ancient Mesopotamian pharmacopoeia, licorice was a superstar. It was used to soothe coughs, heal ulcers, and combat fatigue. Its sweet, rejuvenating properties could easily have been mythologized over centuries into a general, life-giving force. Another, more mystical candidate is mandrake. With its often human-shaped root and powerful psychoactive and medicinal properties, mandrake was surrounded by terrifying folklore. It was said to scream when pulled from the earth, killing anyone who heard it. A plant that demanded a ritual harvest and could induce trance-like states or even death with a wrong dose perfectly fits the profile of a substance believed to hold the key to life and death. But the loss goes deeper than just naming a plant. The ancient Assyrian and Babylonian herbalists operated within a cosmological system where every illness had a supernatural cause, a demon or a displeased god, and every cure required appeasing that divine force. A plant wasn't just a chemical compound, it was a spiritual entity. The herb of immortality wasn't merely a medicine you ingested. It was a gift from the water god E, a physical piece of divine wisdom that had to be acquired through heroic struggle and ritual correctness. The precise incantations spoken over the herb as it was harvested, the specific day of the lunar cycle deemed auspicious for its preparation, the exact ritual purification of the herbalist, this was the true pharmacology. The plant's physical properties worked in tandem with the spiritual protocol to effect a cure. This is a layer of knowledge completely inaccessible to modern science. We can analyze licorice for glycyrrhizin or mandrake for its tropane alkaloids, but we cannot reconstruct the hymn that was sung to turn those molecules into a conduit for divine grace. The mythological framework was the operating system, and the plant was the software. We have recovered fragments of the code, but the system it ran on is gone. The serpent didn't just steal Gilgamesh's plant, it swallowed the entire user manual for how to believe in it. Gilgamesh's quest for immortality was a solitary, mythical struggle, but the pharaohs of Egypt launched entire fleets in pursuit of a more tangible treasure, scent. For over 1,000 years, they sent majestic trading expeditions south down the Red Sea, bound for a fabled realm known only as the Land of Punt. This was not a place of conquest, but of wonder, described in hieroglyphs as the Terrace of Incense, the home of the gods. The Egyptians did not go for gold or slaves, they went for plants. The walls of Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari are a cinematic record of one such voyage carved in stunning detail. We see the Egyptian ships, heavy with trade goods, arriving at a strange shore dotted with domed huts built on stilts. The people of Punt, with their distinct appearance, welcome them. And most importantly, we see the cargo being loaded, live incense trees, their roots carefully balled in baskets for the long journey home. The inscriptions list frankincense and myrrh, the legendary resins that fueled temple rituals and embalming practices. But the reliefs also show other, unidentifiable plants, strange shrubs and fragrant woods that have no modern name. This is our next lost knowledge, a dual mystery, the very location of this perfumed paradise and the identity of the other sacred plants it held. The land of Punt has vanished from the map as completely as Atlantis. Scholars have debated its location for centuries. Was it in modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, or further south along the coast of Yemen? The botanical clues are maddeningly vague. The Egyptians called it God's Land, a place of exotic animals and rare aromatics, but without a definitive archaeological site, Punt remains a geographical ghost, its precise harbors and groves lost to time. This means the specific microclimates and soils that produced its legendary fragrances are also unknown. The loss deepens when we consider the other plants. Frankincense and myrrh we know. They come from specific, gnarly trees of the Boswellia and Commiphora genera, tapped for their aromatic sap, but the Egyptian records hint at more. There was kesate wood prized for its perfume. There was iheb resin and the mysterious antiu plant. These words are labels on empty jars. We have no idea what they were. Each represents a unique scent profile, a fragrance that could have been citrusy, spicy, floral, or smoky, an olfactory note that has completely disappeared from the human experience. Imagine a color you have never seen. That is what these lost scents are. The true loss, however, is not just the list of names, but the living knowledge of the Puntites themselves. These were not primitive gatherers. The reliefs show them tending groves. They were master horticulturalists who understood the exacting science of cultivating these temperamental trees and shrubs. When and how deep to plant the seeds? What companion plants might protect the young saplings from desert winds? At what precise angle should you make the cut in the bark to harvest the resin without killing the tree? And for those other vanished plants, what was their harvest? Was it a leaf, a flower, a root, or a bark? Was the fragrance released by drying, crushing, or burning? This was a complete botanical culture, a symphony of scent cultivated over generations. The Egyptians were brilliant customers, but they may have never learned the full score. They brought back the trees and the resins, but did they ever learn the Puntites' secret songs for the soil, the whispered prayers to the earth that ensured a bountiful harvest? When the trade routes to Punt eventually faded, silenced by changing political winds or climate shifts, that direct transmission of wisdom was severed. The trees in Hatshepsut's garden eventually died, and with them died the living connection to the terrace of incense. We are left staring at the silent stone reliefs, seeing the baskets of plants but unable to lean in and catch their fragrance. The location is a riddle, and the scents are ghosts, reminding us that some of the most alluring treasures of the ancient world were not stone or metal, but the very breath of forgotten leaves. From the perfumed gardens of Punt, we travel to the frozen fjords, where a different kind of transformation awaited. The sagas speak of men who became wolves in human skin, warriors who fought with a fury so absolute it seemed supernatural. They were the berserkers. In the grip of their rage, they were said to be immune to fire and iron, biting their shields and howling like beasts before tearing through enemy lines with terrifying strength. This was not mere battle frenzy. Historical accounts strongly suggest it was a state deliberately induced, a trance unlocked by a shaman's potion. The recipe for that potion is a secret buried with the last Norse shaman, a formula lost in the shift from pagan ritual to Christian law. The most persistent theory points to a deadly nightshade, henbane. This plant, with its sticky leaves and foul-smelling yellow flowers, contains powerful tropane alkaloids like scopolamine and hyoscyamine. In controlled doses, these compounds can produce hallucinations, a sense of detachment from the body, and a dramatic increase in heart rate and blood pressure. Symptoms that mirror the berserker's described state of feverish, pain-insensitive fury. A warrior who had consumed a carefully measured draught might truly feel invulnerable, his senses distorted, his fear suppressed, and his strength magnified by a surge of adrenaline and psychosis. But henbane is a poison as much as a potion. The line between a battle trance and a fatal seizure is perilously thin. This is where the lost knowledge becomes critical. The potion was almost certainly not a single ingredient. It was likely a complex blend, a bitter cocktail designed by a Volva, a Norse seeress who understood synergies and antidotes. Some researchers proposed the inclusion of the hallucinogenic fly agaric mushroom, known in Siberia for its ability to produce feelings of immense size and power. Others suggest ale brewed with bog myrtle or even potent alcohol to accelerate the herb's effects. The shaman's role was not just that of a pharmacist, but of a psychological guide. The ritual context was the other half of the formula. The consumption of the potion would have been preceded by specific chants, perhaps invocations to Odin, the god of ecstasy and war, or to the animal spirits of the bear or wolf. The warrior would be in a prepared state of mind, expecting and welcoming the transformation. This set and setting the cold Norse night, the drumming, the expectations of the group would have powerfully shaped the psychoactive experience, channeling the chaotic hallucinations into a focused, directed rage. Without that ritual container, the same chemical brew might just cause a man to collapse in terror or stumble blindly into a tree. The exact ratios in the blend, the order of mixing, the incantations spoken over the brew, and the precise moment it was administered before battle. This was a high-stakes technology passed down through an oral tradition of seers. When Christianity took hold, these practices were outlawed and driven underground. The last person who knew the full recipe died without writing it down, taking the secret of the wolf's heart with them. We are left with the terrifying image in the sagas and a handful of toxic plants, forever wondering what precise alchemy turned a man into a myth. The berserker's brew was a weapon of war, but in the steamy jungles of the Maya, a sacred drink served as a bridge to the cosmos. Their ritual beverage was called balshay, and it was the lifeblood of ceremony, a fizzy, mildly intoxicating libation that opened the channels of communication between the human and divine realms. Unlike the potent, fear-inducing potions of the north, balshay was a communal sacrament, its preparation and consumption governed by a protocol as intricate as the Mayan calendar itself. The base ingredient seems simple enough: the bark of the lonchocarpus tree, often called the balshay tree, and wild honey from the stingless bees of the Yucatan. The bark contains rotenone and other compounds that, when fermented with honey and water, create a slightly psychoactive, mildly intoxicating brew. It was not meant to induce violent frenzy, but a gentle, euphoric state of receptivity, a sober drunkenness that allowed priests and participants alike to shed their mundane concerns and become vessels for divine messages. The physical recipe, however, is just the skeleton. The true loss is the flesh and spirit that clothed it, the complete ceremonial protocol that transformed a botanical mixture into a holy medium. Every step was a prayer. The harvesting of the bark was not a casual act of forestry. Specific chants were likely sung to the spirit of the tree, apologizing for the cut and thanking it for its gift. The time of year, the phase of the moon, even the direction from which the bark was stripped, would have held profound significance, aligning the act with celestial forces. Then came the fermentation process, which was far from a simple matter of mixing and waiting. The combination of bark, honey, and water was placed in a dedicated canoe-shaped trough, itself a sacred object. The length of fermentation was precise, not determined by a clock, but by signs. Did the priests watch for a specific pattern of bubbles on the surface? Did they judge the readiness by a particular scent, or by a ritual taste test performed at a designated hour? This was a science of observation, where the natural process was guided by ritual intention to achieve a very specific, mild psychoactive potency, enough to open the mind, but not so much as to shatter the ritual's solemn structure. The consumption itself was a nuanced social and spiritual map. The way a priest drank balshay during a private divination in a dark temple chamber was utterly different from how the populace consumed it during a public festival celebrating the maize god. For the priest, it might be a solitary, measured sip from a special jade cup followed by hours of chanting and scrying. For the community, it might be a shared cup passed around a plaza, fostering a collective sense of unity and celebration under the watchful eyes of the gods. Each context demanded a different etiquette, a different set of accompanying prayers, and perhaps even a slightly different brew strength. The Spanish missionaries, seeing balshay as a tool of pagan idolatry, violently suppressed its use. They cut down the sacred trees and banned the ceremonies. While the drink itself never fully disappeared, indigenous communities in parts of Mexico and Central America still make versions of it today. The vast, intricate tapestry of ritual knowledge was shredded. We may have the general recipe, but we have lost the conductor for its sacred symphony. The specific hymns sung as the honey was poured, the exact hand gestures used to skim the fermenting brew, the subtle distinctions in serving vessels for different gods, these details turned a drink into a doorway. That doorway, once crowded with prayer, now stands mostly silent, its intricate carvings worn smooth by time. The gentle communal trance of Balshay stands in stark contrast to a far more solitary and perilous quest that consumed scholars in ancient China. Here, the pursuit of immortality was not a matter of prayer or potion, but of rigorous, dangerous experimentation, a field they called Weiden or external alchemy. Taoist adepts believed that just as one could transform base metals into gold, one could refine the human body into an immortal, incorruptible form through the consumption of perfected substances. Their laboratories were not temples of worship, but smoky workshops filled with crucibles, furnaces, and an array of terrifying ingredients: cinnabar, a brilliant red mercury sulfide, arsenic, lead, and deadly plants like aconite, also known as monkshood or wolfsbane. These were not gentle herbs, they were poisons of the highest order. The alchemist's audacious goal was to master these violent substances, to subject them to such precise and profound transformations that their toxic nature would be inverted, becoming the very fuel for eternal life. Historical records and some alchemical texts have survived, giving us the broad strokes of their theories and ingredient lists. We know, for instance, that they sought the ninefold cyclically transformed elixir, a substance refined through 9 successive cycles of heating and cooling. But the texts are deliberately cryptic, filled with symbolic language referring to dragons, tigers, and the union of yin and yang. This obscurity was a feature, not a bug. It protected the most critical knowledge, the hands-on, tactile art of the craft. The true loss is the master's logbook, the unrecorded sensory data that turned a deadly recipe into a hoped-for elixir. Consider the processing of aconite. This beautiful purple flower contains aconitine, a neurotoxin so potent that a few milligrams can be fatal. Yet Chinese medical texts, even outside alchemy, speak of using processed aconite to treat pain and heart conditions. The difference between medicine and murder lay in a meticulous, multi-step detoxification process. The root would be sliced, soaked, boiled, and steamed, sometimes for days, often with other herbal adjuncts like ginger or licorice. The alchemist needed to know the exact color change in the water that signaled one toxin had been removed, the precise texture of the root flesh that indicated it was ready for the next stage, and the specific smell that meant the process was complete and safe, or had gone horribly wrong. This was knowledge gained not from a book, but from standing at the bench for decades, watching a master's hands, learning to read the subtleties of steam and residue. Even more elusive were the rituals performed during synthesis. Alchemy was not a purely mechanical science. Each step was synchronized with cosmic rhythms. The fire in the furnace might be kindled at the moment of the winter solstice, aligning the process with the rebirth of the sun. Specific mantras would be chanted while stirring the mixture in the crucible, not just as prayer, but as a form of focused intention believed to literally alter the substance's spiritual quality. The alchemist himself had to be in a state of ritual purity, often after months of meditation and fasting. The process was a spiritual technology where the operator's own energy was part of the reaction. This holistic protocol, the exact temperature gradient of the furnace over a 72-hour cycle, the specific cadence of a chant, the master's intuitive decision to add one more piece of charcoal at a critical moment was the true secret. It was taught in silence and through demonstration, a sacred trust between teacher and disciple, and it died with shocking frequency. Historical accounts note many aspiring immortals who succumbed to acute heavy metal poisoning or plant toxin overdose, their failed experiments taking the precise details of what went wrong to the grave. Their successors would then have to start again, reinventing fragments of the process, often with equally fatal results. we are left with the tragic irony that their quest for an elixir of life produced, in the short term, some of the most efficient elixirs of death. Yet within that failure lies a haunting question. Did any master in some isolated mountain workshop ever achieve a stable, transformative formula? And if so, did that knowledge vanish in a single, final, successful experiment, leaving no apprentice behind to tell the tale? The quest for immortality in smoky alchemy labs was a solitary gamble, but the ancient world's most celebrated communal pleasure was a liquid art form of staggering complexity. The Romans did not just drink wine, they lived in a universe of it, cataloging hundreds of distinct grape varieties and regional styles with the precision of modern sommeliers. Writers like Pliny the Elder and Columella described wines that tasted of smoke, of the sea, of violets, or even of pitch. There was Falernian, a legendary white aged for decades until it was thick as honey, and kykeon, a rich red from the marshes praised for its potency. The loss here is a dual catastrophe: the extinction of unique genetic lineages and the erasure of the specific winemaking alchemy that created flavors we can scarcely comprehend today. The primary culprit was a tiny, ravenous insect, Phylloxera. In the late 19th century, this aphid-like pest arrived from North America and proceeded to devastate vineyards across Europe, attacking the roots of the venerable Vitis vinifera species. The only salvation was to graft European grapevines onto resistant American rootstock. This saved the wine industry, but it came at a hidden cost. Countless ancient, ungrafted vines, strains that had been passed down from Roman times, perfectly adapted to their specific hillside or valley, were ripped out and destroyed in the panic. They were replaced by a smaller selection of reliable, grafted varieties that could survive the plague and meet modern market demands. The genetic library of classical wine, with its hundreds of nuanced cultivars, was burned. But the loss goes deeper than the vines themselves. It includes the lost manual for their cultivation. Roman viticulture was an intimate science. Certain grapes were grown on tall trees, others on low trellises. Some were planted in volcanic soil to gain a flinty character, others near the coast to absorb a saline quality from the sea air. The precise pruning methods, the timing of the harvest, even the type of willow used for the vine stakes were all considered essential to the final flavor. Then came the vinification, the transformation of grape into wine. When Pliny writes of a smoky wine, he isn't being poetic. This was likely a deliberate technique. Amphorae, the clay jars used for fermentation and storage, were often lined with pitch or resin. The type of resin, the thickness of the lining, and how long the wine sat within it would impart distinct smoky, piney, or tarry notes. A salty wine might come from grapes grown near the ocean, but it could also be a result of adding seawater directly to the must, a practice mentioned in some texts as a preservative and flavor enhancer. The recipes for these transformations are gone. We have broad descriptions but not the precise formula. How much seawater per amphora, which specific pine resin from which forest? For how many months should the wine age in a smoke-filled cellar? This was tactile, local knowledge passed from father to son in wine-producing families for generations. When those families switched to new grapes and new methods after Phylloxera, that chain of oral tradition was broken. We can make wine from Italian soil today, but we cannot recreate the exact taste of a first-century Falernian. That flavor profile, a combination of a lost grape, a lost farming method, and a lost recipe inside a pitched clay jar, is a ghost on the palate. The modern wine world is rich and diverse, but it is built upon a fraction of the genetic and cultural diversity that once existed. We saved wine from extinction, but in the process, we misplaced the original library of its possibilities. Roman wine was a tapestry of lost flavors, but on the other side of the world, an entire continent was woven together by the trade of a single, powerful leaf. Across the vast, arid interior of Australia, Aboriginal nations maintained one of the most extensive and sophisticated trade routes on the planet. all centered on a botanical treasure called pitchery. This was not a food or a medicine in the ordinary sense. It was a carefully prepared psychoactive chew, a social and ceremonial catalyst made from the leaves of desert shrubs, primarily Duboisia hapudii. The plant itself is a paradox, thriving in some of the harshest, most water-starved landscapes on Earth. Finding it was the first layer of a profound lost science. The knowledge of where pitchery grew was not a simple map. It was an ecological symphony held in memory. The custodians knew it favored specific microhabitats, perhaps a dry creek bed where water ran underground, or the shaded side of a particular rock formation that collected precious dew. They understood its relationship to other plants and animals. The presence of certain birds or ants might signal its proximity. This was a granular, intimate understanding of country, a living database of survival that allowed them to locate this precious resource across thousands of miles of seemingly uniform desert. Once found, the raw leaf was not simply picked and chewed. It was inert, even toxic. The transformation into the potent pitchery quid required a precise and multi-step alchemy that turned a dangerous plant into a valued commodity. The leaves were carefully harvested, then cured using a method of slow fermentation. They were placed in a specially prepared pit lined with hot stones and sand, covered with bark or animal skins, and left to cook for a period of time. This critical process, likely involving specific bacteria or chemical changes triggered by the heat, activated the psychoactive alkaloids, primarily nicotine and scopolamine, while reducing harmful toxins. The cured leaves were then mixed with the alkaline ash of particular acacia or wattleseed wood. This ash was not random. It had to be from a specific tree to create the correct pH, which dramatically increased the absorption of the nicotine into the bloodstream through the gums. The final product was a compacted, tobacco-like quid that could be carried for months and shared. The mastery of this process, from the identification of the correct shrub to the selection of the right ash, was a chemical engineering feat passed down through generations. This knowledge did not exist in a vacuum. It was embedded within and facilitated by the continent-spanning trade network known as the dreaming tracks or songlines. Pitchery was a premium item, traded over distances exceeding 1,000 kilometers from its source regions in the central deserts to communities in the south, east, and north. In exchange for bundles of prepared pitchery, communities would receive seashells from the northern coast, red ochre from sacred mines in the south, stone for tools, and prized wooden weapons. But this was far more than a simple barter system. The trade routes were the physical manifestation of songline's ancestral pathways that crisscrossed the land, encoding navigation, lore, history, and ecological knowledge in song cycles. The story of the pitchery plant, its location, and the method of its preparation was likely itself a part of these songs. To know the song was to know where to find the plant and how to process it. The trade gatherings were thus also ceremonial gatherings, where the exchange of material goods reinforced social bonds, diplomacy, and the shared custodianship of knowledge. The disruption caused by European colonization was catastrophic and multidimensional. It was not merely the introduction of commercial tobacco, which eventually supplanted pitchery's everyday use. The true loss was the systematic dismantling of the entire system that gave pitchery its meaning. As Aboriginal peoples were displaced from their lands, the intimate ecological knowledge of where the shrubs grew began to fade. The complex preparation rituals, performed at specific times and places as part of a ceremonial cycle, were suppressed or could no longer be practiced. Most devastatingly, the songlines that mapped the trade routes and encoded the instructions were fractured. With communities separated and elders passing away, entire verses of the living map went silent. The physical trade network collapsed, and with it the constant living rehearsal of the knowledge required to sustain it. Today, scientists can study the Duboisia plant and analyze its chemistry, but they are reconstructing a skeleton. The song that gave it life, the ritual that transformed it, and the continent-wide web of relationships it sustained That intricate, humming network of mind, land, and culture is a silence we can only feel the edges of. We know the trade happened, but we can no longer hear the songs that guided its footsteps. The silent trade routes of Australia fade, and we find ourselves in a world of vibrant color and sudden, catastrophic silence. On the sun-drenched island of Santorini, long before it was shattered by a volcano, the Minoan civilization created frescoes of breathtaking beauty. Among the most famous is the saffron gatherer, a young woman delicately plucking the crimson threads from a field of blooming purple crocuses. This is not a simple pastoral scene. It is a window into a lost botanical industry of immense sophistication, where a flower was worth more than gold. The Minoans did not just harvest wild saffron. The frescoes suggest organized cultivation with rows of flowers and systematic gathering. They were master horticulturalists who likely bred specific strains of the Crocus sativus plant over generations, selecting for flowers with longer, richer stigmas, the precious saffron threads, and a higher concentration of the compounds that gave it value. The potency of their saffron, therefore, was not an accident of nature. It was a deliberate achievement, a product of selective breeding knowledge that vanished when their world ended. Saffron was their triple treasure. As a dye, it produced the luminous yellows and oranges seen in their own artwork and textiles, colors that signified prestige and divinity. As a medicine, ancient texts from neighboring cultures later noted its use for everything from stomach ailments to melancholy. The Minoans almost certainly possessed their own advanced pharmacopoeia based on this potent spice. But the deepest mystery lies in the ritual significance of the gathering itself. Why was this mundane agricultural task immortalized in sacred spaces? The frescoes show the gatherers in elegant dress, moving with a graceful, almost ceremonial purpose. Some scholars believe the Crocus gathering was not just an economic activity, but a religious rite, possibly dedicated to a mother or nature goddess. The act of harvesting the red stigmas could have symbolized a sacred marriage, the fertilization of the earth, or the collection of divine essence. The precise prayers sung in the fields, the offerings made to ensure a bountiful harvest, the way the first threads were presented in a temple, this entire liturgical framework is gone. Then, around the year 1600 before the Common Era, the volcano at Thera erupted with apocalyptic force. The blast buried the town of Akrotiri under meters of ash, perfectly preserving the frescoes but obliterating the living culture that created them. Tsunamis devastated Crete, and the ensuing climatic chaos crippled Minoan civilization. The delicate chain of knowledge, the master growers who knew which bulbs to save for planting, the priestesses who understood the ritual calendar for harvest, the dyers who knew the secret mordants to make the color fast, was shattered. Later Greek cultures inherited a taste for saffron, but they inherited a commodity, not the complete cultural blueprint. The specific Minoan crocus strain, optimized over centuries for the unique volcanic soil of Thera, may have died out entirely. We see the silent, beautiful act of gathering frozen in time, but the song that guided their hands and the legendary strength of the saffron they held is dust on the wind. While the Minoan frescoes capture a silent harvest, the sacred chants of ancient Persia sought to capture the very voice of the divine. In the Zoroastrian tradition, the counterpart to the Vedic Soma was Hayama, a deity plant whose ritual preparation was the heartbeat of worship. The yasna ceremony, still performed today, revolves around the pressing of twigs to produce a sacred juice. Modern Zoroastrians, however, use a substitute, ephedra, a small, leafless shrub that provides a stimulant effect. This raises a haunting question. The ecstatic descriptions in the older Avestan texts, the very hymns that praise Hayama, speak of something far more profound than a mild energy boost. They describe visions, divine revelations, and an expansion of consciousness that allowed the priests, the magi, to perceive the order of the cosmos and commune with Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. The modern ephedra, while fitting some physical descriptions, simply does not align with this transcendental experience. This points to a familiar, chilling loss. The original Hayama plant, the true botanical vessel for those ancient visions, has likely vanished, its identity swallowed by the same sands of time that consumed its Indian sibling, Soma. The deeper loss, however, lies not just in the plant but in the hands that prepared it. The Magi were not mere ritualists, they were master herbalists and alchemists of the sacred. The yasna ceremony we see today is a skeleton, a preserved form. The flesh and spirit that animated it, the specific, secret knowledge of the original Hayama's preparation, belonged exclusively to the priestly caste and has been obscured by centuries of religious evolution and persecution. Consider the process. The ancient texts speak of pressing the twigs with a ritual mortar and pestle, mixing the juice with water, milk, and pomegranate leaves, and filtering it through a sieve. But these are the broad strokes. The lost manual contains the details that turned a recipe into a revelation. Which exact variety of the original plant was used? Was it harvested at dawn or under a full moon? Did the twigs come from the north or south side of the mountain? More critically, what was the precise sequence of the 9 and 72-day purification rituals the priest underwent before he was even allowed to touch the tools? His own spiritual state was considered a direct ingredient in the mixture. The preparation itself was likely a chemical as much as a spiritual catalysis. If the original Hayama was a potent psychoactive plant, perhaps a now extinct fungus or a unique desert shrub, its raw state might have been toxic or inert. The Magi would have possessed a detoxification or activation protocol, a series of steps soaking, heating, fermenting with specific other herbs that transformed a dangerous botanical specimen into a safe, visionary sacrament. This was a guarded technology. Each gesture, each strain of the cloth filtering the liquid, each drop of milk added, was accompanied by a specific mantra, a vibration believed to structure the molecular essence of the drink itself. The ceremony was a living, breathing machine designed to extract not just juice but wisdom. When Zoroastrianism faced centuries of Islamic conquest and diaspora, this chain of esoteric knowledge was fractured. The original plant, if it was a rare cultivar or a wild species with a limited range, may have become impossible to source. Forced to adapt, the community made a pragmatic, survival-driven choice. They replaced the lost visionary core with a readily available plant that maintained the ritual's form, its symbolic structure, even as its transformative heart slowed to a whisper. The modern ephedra ceremony is a faithful echo, a loving preservation of the sacred vessel, but the wine that once filled it, the draught that promised a glimpse of eternal light, has been poured out and lost. We are left with a beautiful, empty cup and the fading memory of what it once contained. The silent cups of lost Hayama leave us with a profound question of preservation. How does a civilization ensure its thoughts, its laws, and its dreams outlast the lifespan of stone? For ancient Egypt, the answer floated in the sunlit marshes of the Nile Delta. It was a plant called Cyprus papyrus, a towering sedge that provided not just paper, but the very medium of memory itself. We know the basic ingredient, but the true marvel was the transformation. A guarded industrial art that turned a spongy stalk into a durable, smooth sheet capable of lasting millennia. This was not a simple craft. It was a proprietary technology, a secret so valuable it helped maintain Egypt's intellectual and administrative dominance for centuries. The process began with a brutal harvest, wading into crocodile-infested waters to cut the triangular stems, which could grow over 15 feet tall. The outer green rind was peeled away to reveal the precious, white, fibrous pith at the core. This is where the first secret lies. The pith was not simply mashed or flattened. It had to be sliced, but with what? The texts are silent. Was it a specially honed bronze knife with a uniquely curved blade? A razor-sharp flint tool that created a cleaner edge than metal? The craftsman needed to cut the pith into extremely thin, uniform strips, likely of a specific width, perhaps the breadth of a finger, and of a consistent thickness. This was a surgical procedure performed on plant matter. One uneven cut, and the strip would tear or create a weak spot in the final sheet. Once cut, the magic truly began. The strips were laid side by side, slightly overlapping on a hard, dampened board. Then, a second layer was placed directly on top, perpendicular to the first, creating a cross-hatched pattern. This simple grid was the foundation of paper's strength, but here lies the second critical secret, the adhesive. What bound these two layers into a single, coherent sheet? Some accounts mention the natural glutinous properties of the papyrus pith itself, activated by the water of the Nile. The craftsmen may have used the muddy Nile water not just for moisture, but because it contained specific dissolved minerals or organic compounds that acted as a natural binder. Other theories suggest a thin paste made from wheat flour or boiled roots. The choice was everything. Too weak and adhesive, and the layers would separate as they dried, creating a fragile, flaking sheet. Too strong or acidic a glue, and it would brown and brittle the papyrus over time, defeating the purpose of creating a durable record. The application was just as precise. Was the adhesive brushed on each strip, or was the entire assembled grid pressed into a damp cloth soaked in the binding solution? Then came the final phase, pressing and drying. The assembled sheet was placed between two absorbent cloths and hammered or pressed with heavy stones, perhaps for days. This forced the layers to fuse as the moisture was squeezed out and the natural sugars in the pith cemented the fibers. The final drying was likely done in the sun, but not in direct, scorching heat that would cause cracking. It was a slow, controlled process, perhaps in a shaded, ventilated shed. The finished sheet was then polished smooth with a stone or a piece of ivory, creating that iconic, slightly textured, creamy white surface ready for the scribe's brush. This entire sequence, from the angle of the cut to the recipe of the paste to the rhythm of the hammer, was a tightly held guild secret. It was knowledge passed from master to apprentice on the workshop floor, never written down on the very product it created. The decline came with competition. Parchment made from animal skins was more durable and could be produced anywhere, not just in the Nile marshes. Later, paper, invented in China and spreading west, was cheaper and more versatile. As demand for papyrus waned, the workshops closed. The last masters of this art died without training successors in the full, nuanced craft. We can make papyrus today, but our modern versions are often thick, brittle, and lack the legendary flexibility and longevity of the ancient scrolls that survive in tombs. We have reassembled the skeleton of the process, but we have lost the feel for the living flesh of the craft. The exact pressure of the hammer, the precise murky consistency of the Nile water glue, the intuitive knowledge of when a drying sheet was perfectly cured. The plant still grows, but the hands that truly understood it are gone, leaving us with the magnificent texts but not the full manual for the page they are written on. While papyrus preserved words in black and white, another civilization mastered the art of speaking in color. The Phoenicians, those legendary seafarers of the ancient Mediterranean, built an empire not just on cedar wood and glass, but on a monopoly of hues so vivid they became synonymous with power itself. Everyone knows the story of Tyrian purple, the legendary dye laboriously extracted from the murex sea snail, a color so expensive it was reserved for emperors and kings. But that royal purple was merely the crown jewel in a vast, secret palette. The Phoenicians were the undisputed masters of dyeing, and their true genius lay in a spectrum of vibrant colors derived from plants, a complete chromatic technology that vanished when their civilization was absorbed and their workshops fell silent. The loss here is not of one color, but of an entire rainbow and the complex chemical wisdom that fixed it into cloth. Beyond the famous purple, their ports would have been a riot of color. Imagine bolts of linen and wool hanging in the sun, not just in imperial purple, but in brilliant saffron yellows, deep madder reds, rich weld greens, and clear sky-like blues. Each of these colors came from a specific plant, and the Phoenicians likely knew the perfect source for each hue, but the names of their preferred varieties are lost to us. Was there legendary red from the common madder root, or a now extinct subspecies cultivated on Cyprus that produced a deeper, more crimson shade? Did their vibrant yellow come from the saffron crocus, the weld plant, or perhaps a local, potent variety of broom? We have general categories, but the Phoenician dyers knew the exact patch of earth, the precise stage of growth, and the optimal harvest time for the plant that would yield the most intense and consistent color. That botanical intimacy, that granular knowledge of place and plant, was the first layer of their secret. The real magic, however, happened not in the field but in the dye vat. Extracting color is one thing, making it stick is an alchemy of its own. This is where the Phoenicians held their most guarded trade secrets, the art of mordanting. A mordant is a metallic salt that acts as a molecular bridge, binding the dye pigment permanently to the fabric fibers. Without it, most plant dyes wash out quickly, fading to a sad, pale shadow. The Phoenicians didn't just use mordants, they perfected complex, multi-step processes using local minerals that gave them an unbeatable advantage. Their coastal homeland was rich in specific resources. They likely used alum, a sulfate mineral, for bright, clear colors. For darker, richer shades, they might have used iron salts, perhaps from bog ore or specific local clays. Copper salts from Cypriot mines could have produced unique greenish or turquoise tones. The lost knowledge is in the recipes. It wasn't a matter of tossing a mineral into a pot. The process was a precise sequence. Was the fabric first soaked in a tannin-rich solution from oak galls to prepare the fibers? Was the mordant applied before the dye, after it, or in the same bath? What was the exact pH of the water, adjusted with wood, ash, or vinegar? How long did the fabric simmer, and at what temperature? A difference of a few degrees or minutes could mean the difference between a brilliant, color-fast scarlet and a dull, blotchy pink. This chemical mastery granted them a monopoly that fueled their wealth for centuries. A Phoenician trader could unroll a bolt of cloth in a Greek marketplace or an Egyptian royal court and guarantee its color would not fade in the sun or wash out in the rain. This reliability was worth a fortune. It was a brand promise etched not in words but in the very molecular structure of the textile. The entire process, from plant selection to final rinsing, was a compartmentalized secret. Perhaps the harvesters knew the plants but not the mordants. The vat masters knew the recipes but never saw the living source. This security system died with their civilization. As the Phoenician city-states were conquered by Assyrians, Babylonians, and finally Alexander the Great, their specialized workshops were destroyed or dispersed. The dyers, now subjects of new empires, may have taken their fragments of knowledge with them, but the integrated system, the complete chain from seed to sublime, lasting color, was broken. Later cultures, like the Romans, famously prized Tyrian purple, but never matched the Phoenicians' full-spectrum expertise. They inherited the color purple, but they lost the library of recipes for all the others. We can approximate their colors today with modern chemistry, but we are left wondering at the specific, vibrant shade of a Phoenician red that once caught the Mediterranean sun, a color whose formula now lies at the bottom of the sea, somewhere between the Murex shell and the lost dyer's ledger. The Phoenicians' secret dyes colored a world they knew, but the Amazon rainforest held pigments for the soul itself. While the sacred brew ayahuasca has survived, carried through generations of indigenous shamans, it is almost certainly not the only key they forged to the spirit world. It is merely the one that made it through the cataclysm of conquest. The Amazon basin is the most biodiverse pharmacy on the planet, home to hundreds, if not thousands, of plants with documented psychoactive properties. For the sophisticated societies that flourished there for millennia, ayahuasca was not a singular miracle, but a foundational recipe in a vast, living library of consciousness-altering blends. The terrifying and beautiful truth is that most of that library is gone, its shelves collapsed, its pages dissolved by rain and time. We are left with a single, well-thumbed volume, wondering about the countless others that were lost. Consider the basic ayahuasca recipe itself, a testament to staggering botanical genius. It is a two-part formula, the Banisteriopsis copy vine, which contains Harmala alkaloids, and the leaves of the Psychotria viridis shrub, which contains DMT. On their own, these plants are mostly inert if ingested because stomach enzymes destroy the DMT. But the Harmala alkaloids in the vine act as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, a natural chemical key that unlocks the DMT's visionary power, allowing it to cross into the bloodstream and reach the brain. This is not an obvious combination. It represents thousands of years of meticulous, courageous experimentation by countless shamans, a process of trial and error conducted across an area the size of a continent. Now, if they discovered this one profoundly effective combination, how many others did they find? The rainforest offers an almost infinite palette for such experimentation. There are tryptamine-rich plants beyond Psychotria viridis, like various acacia or mimosa species. There are other sources of Harmala alkaloids and a whole other universe of psychoactive compounds, tropane alkaloids, beta-carbolines, and substances modern science has yet to classify. The shamans were master chemists of the intangible. They would have experimented with different admixtures, a third plant to shape the visions, a fourth to ease the physical purge, a fifth to target specific spiritual ailments. Each combination would have produced a different quality of journey, one for healing physical sickness, another for divining the location of game, another for communing with specific animal spirits, and yet another for resolving conflicts within the community. This was a precision toolkit for the human psyche, and we have likely lost 99% of its instruments. The loss is not merely of recipes, but of the very plants that comprise them. The Amazon is not a static garden. It is a dynamic, living entity undergoing constant change. In the millennia before European contact, vast areas were managed, cultivated, and even terraformed by complex societies. They planted gardens of medicinal and sacred plants around their settlements and along trade routes. When those societies were shattered by old-world diseases which often raced ahead of the actual conquistadors, wiping out up to 95% of the population, their cultivated gardens were abandoned. Without human tending, the rainforest quickly reclaimed these spaces. A specially bred cultivar of a visionary plant, nurtured over centuries for its particular potency or flavor of vision, would have been outcompeted by wild species and vanished within a few generations. Entire species with narrow ranges may have gone extinct entirely, taking their unique chemical profiles with them. Furthermore, the knowledge was hyper-local. A shaman on one tributary of the river might use a specific, locally endemic leaf as an admixture, a secret known only to her lineage. If a fever wiped out that village before an apprentice could be fully initiated, that specific piece of the pharmacopoeia died with her. The fragmentation was absolute. What survived was the hardiest, most widely shared knowledge, the core ayahuasca recipe, because it was reinforced across a broad cultural network. The more specialized, localized branches of the tree of knowledge simply rotted away. This represents an extinction event of spiritual technology. Each lost analog was more than a drug. It was a ritual package, a specific doorway with its own guardian and its own purpose. The set and setting were encoded in myth and song. There would have been a specific icaro or medicine song for each major blend, a melody that acted as a guide through that particular visionary landscape. The rituals for harvesting the plants, the time of year, the lunar phase, the prayers of gratitude, all of it was tailored. A brew for contacting ancestors might have been prepared only during the dry season. using vines that grew near burial grounds, and its ceremony would involve the playing of particular clay flutes now lying in fragments at the bottom of a river. We can study the chemistry of the surviving plants, but we cannot hear the songs that were meant to be sung as their brew was drunk. That sacred context, the user manual for each unique experience, is the true depth of the lost. The modern world has rediscovered ayahuasca and is exploring its potential, but we are working with a single, powerful key. We must wonder what other doors once existed in the mind's cathedral, doors that led to chambers of wisdom, healing, or terror we can no longer even name. The shamans of the Amazon were mapping the interior universe with a precision we are only beginning to imagine, and most of their maps are now blank, their legends written in a language of leaves that have all fallen. The silent, sacred songs of the Amazonian shamans fade, leaving us in a world of far more earthly desires. In the bustling markets and quiet gardens of ancient Rome, another plant whispered promises of a different kind of power. Its name was Satyrion, and it was not a secret of priests or kings, but a common, fervent hope sold to everyday people. This was the legendary Roman fertility herb, a botanical charm believed to ignite passion and cure barrenness with the same wild energy as the mythical half-goat, half-man creatures it was named for. The satyrs embodied untamed virility and lust, and Romans believed a plant that bore their name must surely capture that essence. Yet today, the true identity of Satyrion is one of the most frustrating puzzles in historical botany. Was it a specific orchid? Many orchids have twin, rounded tubers that resemble testicles, a classic example of the doctrine of signatures, where ancient healers believed a plant's appearance hinted at its use. The early orchid species Orchis mascula was even called Satyrion in some later Greek texts. Or was it a type of fern, perhaps the now rare Ophioglossum vulgatum, known as adder's tongue, whose shape could suggest other anatomical associations? Scholars have debated for centuries, examining vague descriptions from poets like Ovid and dry entries in agricultural manuals. The plant is mentioned but never meticulously described. Its power is celebrated, but its portrait is left unfinished. This ambiguity is the first layer of the loss. We are searching for a phantom in a field of plausible candidates. The mystery deepens when we ask how this elusive plant was actually used. Was Satyrion a food, a medicine, or a magic token? Roman texts offer tantalizing, contradictory clues. Some suggest it was ingested, perhaps ground into a powder and mixed with wine to create a potent love potion. Others imply it was applied topically as an ointment or a poultice, and still other references hint it was carried as a personal amulet, a dried piece of root tucked into a pouch and worn close to the body to exert a constant, sympathetic influence. This uncertainty reveals a profound gap in our understanding of everyday Roman life. We have their grand aqueducts and their laws, but we have lost the intimate, tactile knowledge of their private struggles and hopes. For a couple desperate to conceive a child, or for an individual seeking to enhance their allure, Satyrion was not a trivial superstition. It was a tangible piece of hope, a technology of the body and the heart. The exact protocol, the dosage, the timing, the ritual words spoken while preparing it was likely common knowledge passed among women, herbalists, and midwives. This was folk wisdom, rarely deemed important enough for the formal historical record, yet it was the very fabric of personal experience. Did a wife secretly stir a pinch of Satyrion powder into her husband's evening meal? Did a prospective bride anoint her wrists with a scented oil infused with its essence? We see the shadow of these actions, but the precise human gestures are gone. Perhaps the most evocative lost knowledge surrounds the plant's harvest. Folklore often insisted that plants of great power demanded a ritual harvest, and Satyrion, linked to the wild satyrs, almost certainly had its own set of magical rules. Was it to be gathered only at night, under a full moon when the satyrs were thought to roam? Did the harvester have to use a bronze knife or perhaps their left hand to cut the root? There are hints in broader European folk traditions that such potent roots could shriek when pulled from the ground, or that they must be harvested while reciting a specific incantation to appease the earth spirit. The Romans, deeply superstitious and attuned to the natural world, likely observed similar customs for Satyrion. They may have believed the plant's efficacy was tied to these rites, that a root dug carelessly in the daylight would be inert, while one harvested with the proper reverence would thrum with the satyr's own potent energy. This connection between myth, ritual, and botany represents a complete worldview, one where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was porous, and where plants were active participants in human drama, not passive resources. That holistic belief system, where a fern or an orchid was a conduit for a mythical force, has not survived intact. We have dissected the myths in one library and the plants in a herbarium, but the living thread that connected them has frayed to nothing. The loss of Satyrion is not merely the loss of a plant's name, but the loss of a very human understanding of nature, where desire had a root, hope had a leaf, and fertility wore the wild, forgotten face of a satyr smiling from the edge of the woods. The satyr's root promised a personal kind of magic, but in the courts of ancient China, an entire philosophy was once steeped in a different cup. Long before the leaves of the Camellia sinensis plant conquered the world, the concept of tea was a vast and varied garden. For centuries, across the diverse landscapes of ancient Asia, people were brewing infusions from a wild array of leaves, herbs, flowers, and barks, each culture crafting its own version of the comforting, medicinal drink we now universally call tea. This was a world of liquid botanicals, a tapestry of flavors and functions that was largely erased by the eventual dominance of one single plant. The Han Dynasty, in particular, left records hinting at a sophistication we can barely grasp. Their physicians and scholars didn't just boil random leaves. They developed complex recipes, precise formulas that combined multiple plant ingredients for specific health outcomes. A scroll might prescribe a blend of chrysanthemum, pine needles, and a touch of cassia bark to cool the liver and improve eyesight, or a mix of ginger, jujube, and mugwort to warm the stomach and aid digestion. These were not casual brews, they were prescribed elixirs, their ingredients measured, their preparation methods detailed. The knowledge lost here is threefold. First, we've lost the full identification of these alternative plants. The ancient texts use names that are often poetic or descriptive, like immortal's beard grass or five-cloud vine. Matching these names to specific modern botanical species is a detective's nightmare. Many could refer to local varieties of mint, sage, or aster that have since been reclassified or gone extinct in their cultivated forms. Without a living specimen or a perfect illustration, the plant remains a ghost in the text. Second, we've lost the nuanced health claims and the empirical understanding behind them. When a Han Dynasty doctor wrote that a certain leaf infusion regulated the chi or calmed the spirit, he was operating within a complete medical framework. He knew which patient with which set of symptoms should drink that tea at which time of day and for how long. This was granular, practical knowledge. Perhaps a tea made from the young shoots of a particular willow was used for headaches, not because they contained a precursor to aspirin, but because generations of healers observed it work. That observational data, the why behind each claim, faded when the recipe books were abandoned. Finally, and perhaps most poignantly, we've lost the social rituals that grew up around these early infusions. Tea culture, as we know it with its elaborate ceremonies, began with these humble brews. Before there were formal tea houses for sipping green tea, there were likely simple gatherings where a host would prepare a special blend of fragrant artemisia or sweet osmanthus flowers for guests, sharing not just a drink but a specific intention, perhaps for clarity before a long journey or for peace after a dispute. The etiquette, the specific vessels used for different types of infusion, the occasions deemed appropriate for a pine needle tea versus a lotus leaf tea, this entire social grammar has vanished. It was replaced by the global standardization of true tea, as Camellia sinensis was cultivated, refined, and traded along the Silk Road. Its economic and cultural power became overwhelming. It was easier to transport, more profitable to monopolize, and its caffeine content offered a consistent, desirable effect. One by one, those local, idiosyncratic tea traditions were supplanted. The knowledge of how to identify, harvest, and blend those dozens of other plants retreated to the margins, preserved only in scattered folk practices or lost entirely. We are left with a single, magnificent tree, but we have forgotten the entire forest of flavor and ceremony that once surrounded it. The world chose one leaf, and in doing so, it poured out 1,000 other cups, their recipes now evaporated, their steam long since dissolved into the air of forgotten kitchens. That final cup of forgotten tea leaves a bitter taste, a reminder of how easily entire traditions can dissolve. But sometimes a fragment survives, a single page torn from a vast manual, and its very survival makes the loss around it even more palpable. In the cold, damp scriptoriums of Anglo-Saxon England, a monk carefully copied an old parchment, preserving a text that was already ancient in his time. He called it the 9 Herbs Charm. On the surface, it is a magical incantation, a Christianized spell against poison and infection, invoking the power of Woden, the old god, who smites a serpent into 9 pieces. But woven into its poetic lines are the names of 9 plants: mugwort, plantain, lamb's cress, cock spurgrass, chamomile, nettle, crabapple, thyme, and fennel. This is our 26th lost knowledge, a tantalizing clue that offers far more questions than answers. We have the list. Modern botanists can confidently point to each plant in a field. We know mugwort was a revered healing herb across Europe. Plantain was called the mother of warts for its wound healing properties, and nettle is a nutritional powerhouse. The poem even gives vague instructions to crush the herbs into a paste, to mix them with soap and apple residue, and to apply the salve to a wound or make a potion to drink. But here, the real text ends and the silent, lost manual begins. The poem is a mnemonic, a rhyming aid to remember a complex, hands-on procedure that was never written down. The first gap is measurement. The charm says to take the herbs, but in what proportion? Was mugwort, as the first herb named, the primary ingredient making up half the mix? Or was it a balanced blend with a precise pinch of potent thyme and a handful of gentle chamomile? In herbal medicine, dosage is everything. Too much nettle could irritate rather than heal. Too little plantain might render the salve ineffective. The lost knowledge is the recipe card, the specific weights and volumes that transformed a list of ingredients into a reliable medicine. Next, the preparation method is described in a single, cryptic line: crush these herbs together. But how? Were they pounded in a stone mortar with a wooden pestle? And if so, for how long? Was the goal a coarse mash or a fine, smooth paste? Perhaps they were chewed first, using saliva as a solvent, a common practice in many folk traditions where enzymes in the mouth were believed to activate the plant's power. The charm mentions mixing with soap and the residue of an apple. What kind of soap? Was it a simple ash lye soap or one infused with other herbs? Was the apple residue pulp, skin, or fermented cider lees? Each choice would change the salve's consistency, its preservation, and how it interacted with the skin. These are not trivial details, they are the core of the formula, but the most profound loss is the ritual context. The 9 Herbs charm is above all a performance. The healer wasn't just making medicine, they were conducting a symphony of word and action. The poem is meant to be spoken aloud, its rhythms and alliterations casting a spell. But how did the physical gestures align with the verses? Did the healer touch each herb as its name was spoken? Was the salve applied in 9 circular motions, mirroring the 9 pieces of the serpent? Was the wound blown upon 3 times after the application, a common motif in Celtic and Germanic healing rites? The power of the charm likely resided in this perfect synchronization, the spoken word giving intention to the hand, the herbal chemistry working in tandem with psychological belief. This was psychosomatic medicine at its most sophisticated, where faith and phytochemistry were inseparable partners. Without the lived demonstration, the poem is a libretto without stage directions. We can read the words, but we cannot see the dance. We are left with a powerful spell against venom, but we have lost the exact pressure of the thumb as it worked the salve into the skin, the specific tone of voice for the incantation's most potent lines, and the knowing look in the healer's eyes that told the patient the magic had begun. The monk who copied the charm saved its bones, but the muscle, breath, and spirit of the healing art had already faded, leaving only the echo of its rhyme in the cold parchment air. From the cryptic charms of an Anglo-Saxon monk, we travel millennia back to the sun-baked plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, where knowledge was pressed into clay with a wedge-shaped stylus. The Babylonian scholars, inheritors of the Sumerian tradition, were not merely listing plants, they were building a world. Across thousands of cuneiform tablets, they meticulously catalogued the green life around them, creating what we might call the first systematic herbalist's garden in written history. These are not simple inventories, they are taxonomies, attempts to order the chaos of nature into families based on appearance, habitat, or use. One tablet might list all thorny plants, another all aromatic resins, and yet another all grain. They named hundreds, perhaps thousands of specimens, from the mighty cedar of Lebanon to the humblest marsh reed. The physical tablets survived, buried for centuries, but the living knowledge they point to has undergone a double erasure. The first loss is linguistic and botanical. We have the ancient Akkadian or Sumerian names Ashu-hu, Kakru, Burashu, beautiful, rhythmic words that were as common as oak or mint to them. But linking these names definitively to a modern Latin species is a monumental, often impossible, task. The descriptions are sometimes precise, sometimes poetic. A plant might be described as having leaves like a donkey's ear or bearing fruit that blackens the hands. These clues are maddeningly vague. Which of the dozens of local shrubs have leaves that truly resemble a donkey's ear? Was the fruit that stained the hands a black mulberry or a specific type of nightshade berry? Without a living tradition or an illustrated codex, these names float in a historical void. Scholars make educated guesses, comparing ancient Mesopotamian flora with later Greek and Arabic texts, but for many entries, the connection remains a haunting question mark. We possess a detailed library catalog, but we cannot confidently pull most of the books off the shelf. The second, deeper loss is the destruction of the therapeutic system that gave these plants their true meaning. Babylonian medicine was a holistic science where illness was never just physical. It was a symptom of cosmic imbalance, a punishment from a god, or the work of a demon. Their famous diagnostic handbook, the Sakiku, or All Diseases, meticulously catalogued symptoms, from a persistent cough to jaundice to mental anguish, and attributed each to a specific divine displeasure or supernatural cause. This is where their botanical mastery intersected with their cosmology. For every diagnosed ailment, there was a prescribed ritual and a plant-based remedy. The two were inseparable. The loss is the complete protocol that linked them. We have fragments, a tablet might state. If a man is afflicted by the hand of the ghost of his ancestor, and his body is hot and his limbs are stiff, you shall grind together kakru resin, burashu leaves, and pure flour. You shall mix it in first-quality beer and recite the incantation of E 3 times. He shall drink it for 3 days. We have the plant names, we have the incantation's title, and we have the instruction. But we lack the critical connective tissue. What was the precise spiritual diagnosis that matched those specific physical symptoms? How did the priest-physician decide it was the ancestor's ghost and not the demon Pazuzu? That diagnostic key, the flow chart of the supernatural, is only partially recoverable. Furthermore, the preparation is described, but the lost manual holds the nuances. What was the exact proportion of resin to leaves? Was the flour from barley or emmer wheat? Most crucially, what was the incantation of E, the words themselves, the specific vibrations believed to charge the herbal mixture with the healing power of the god of wisdom and water, are almost always omitted from the medical tablets kept in a separate priestly oral tradition. The plant mixture was the physical vehicle, but the spoken spell was the ignition key. Without the exact words recited with the proper intonation, the remedy was considered inert, just bitter herbs in beer. This reveals the true sophistication of their lost system. It wasn't superstition obscuring science. It was an integrated model where pharmacology and psychology worked in concert. The bitter, possibly antimicrobial herbs might treat a low-grade infection causing the fever, while the solemn, days-long ritual of recitation and drinking addressed the patient's terror and guilt, the spiritual cause of their weakened state. The dosage principle for 3 days wasn't arbitrary. It was a complete treatment cycle aligning with lunar phases or ceremonial purity laws. The Babylonian herbalist was a botanist, a chemist, a diagnostician, and a theologian all at once. His knowledge connected the leaf in the field to the constellation in the sky, the ache in the body to the anger of a god. When their civilization fell and the cuneiform script was forgotten, that interconnected web was torn apart. We excavated the clay fragments that list the plants and the symptoms, but the living mind that could navigate between them, that knew which incantation hummed at which frequency to activate which herb for which sorrow turned to dust. We are left with a spreadsheet of ancient ailments and their corresponding botanical entries, but the operating system that made the program run is a blank screen, silently waiting for a password composed of forgotten words and a faith we can no longer reconstruct. The silent spreadsheets of Babylonian medicine recorded plants, but they could not capture the hum of the wings that brought them to life. For every fruit tree and flowering vine, there was an unwritten partner, a living key without which the harvest would fail. Ancient farmers across the globe possessed a subtle, profound wisdom that modern agriculture is only beginning to relearn, a deep, localized knowledge of pollinators. This was not a general understanding of bees, but an intimate familiarity with specific species, the exact solitary bee that emerged with the first bloom of the almond, the particular hummingbird drawn to the shape of a native squash flower, or the night-flying bat that was the sole pollinator of a certain jungle fruit. This symbiotic intelligence was the invisible engine of their food supply, and its loss represents one of the quietest yet most devastating erasures in our botanical history. This knowledge was granular and essential. A farmer in the terraced hills of ancient Anatolia didn't just know that figs needed wasps. He knew the life cycle of the specific fig wasp, Blastophaga scenes, and that the male and female trees had to be planted in a precise ratio and proximity for the tiny insects to complete their crucial hidden dance inside the fruit. In Mesoamerica, the cultivators of vanilla orchids understood that their precious vine could only be pollinated by a particular genus of Melipona, the stingless bee native to those forests. They likely managed habitats to support these bees, perhaps even providing special log hives, knowing their vanilla crop was utterly dependent on this one insect's behavior. This went beyond simple observation. It was a co-evolved partnership, a contract written in nectar and pollen, understood by the farmer down to the week of the year the pollinator would appear. This timing was often encoded not in formal almanacs, but in folklore and farming calendars tied to celestial events. A saying might be passed down: when the Pleiades dip below the horizon at dusk, watch for the blue orchard bee on the apple blossom. The appearance of the insect was as reliable a seasonal marker as the solstice itself, a biological clock woven into the cultural consciousness. The loss of this knowledge was not a single event, but a slow, global fading. As farming industrialized and shifted toward vast monocultures, the intricate place-based wisdom became obsolete. modern agriculture favored a one-size-fits-all approach, relying on a handful of high-yield crop varieties and eventually on shipping in boxes of managed European honeybees to service enormous almond or apple orchards. The honeybee is a remarkable generalist, a workhorse, but it is just one species among tens of thousands of potential pollinators. In the push for efficiency, the ancient, localized partnerships were severed. Why bother learning the habits of an obscure native ground nesting bee when you could rent hives by the truckload? The old, hyper-specific knowledge, which wildflower to leave uncultivated at the field's edge to feed the pollinator in its off-season, which hollow reeds to bundle together to provide nesting sites for a specific mason bee, was no longer taught. It simply stopped being useful, and like a language with no new speakers, it began to die. The consequence of this forgetting is a silent crisis of biodiversity that now threatens our own food security. We replaced a symphony of specialized pollinators with a single, stressed instrument. Today, as honeybee colonies face collapse from disease, pesticides, and habitat loss, we are suddenly, desperately looking back at that lost manual. We realize that the ancient farmer's way was not primitive but profoundly resilient. Their systems were polycultures, mosaics of different plants that bloomed in succession, supporting a diverse community of pollinators throughout the year. If one species had a bad season, another could step in. It was a decentralized, ecological insurance policy. We traded that for a fragile monopoly. The loss of pollinator knowledge means we have forgotten how to speak to the very creatures that fertilize up to a third of the food on our plates. We are left with silent fields that are productive only through constant, precarious intervention, having misplaced the ancient art of the invitation, the specific, local gestures that told a wild bee or a bat that this was a home, and its work here was essential. That intricate welcome, perfected over millennia, has been replaced by the hum of a diesel truck, a sound that promises no loyalty and offers no guarantee for the seasons to come. The silent hum of forgotten pollinators leaves a void, but some ancient cultures sought a different kind of silence, not for the land, but for the human heart. In the fourth book of Homer's Odyssey, a queen offers a draught not of strength or vision, but of merciful oblivion. Her name is Helen of Troy, and the potion she mixes is called Nepenthes. After the horrors of the Trojan War, as guests in her palace weep with fresh grief, she pours this mysterious substance into their wine. Homer tells us it was a drug against sorrow, a medicine so powerful that anyone who drank it would forget all pain, would be incapable of shedding a single tear, even if their own mother and father lay dead before them. This was not a weapon or a sacrament. It was the ancient world's most poignant prescription, a chemical cure for memory itself. For centuries after Homer, Greek scholars and physicians were haunted by this description. They believed Nepenthes was not pure fiction, but a mythologized memory of a real, potent plant. The lost knowledge here is the identity of that herb and the early, sophisticated understanding of psychological healing it represents, an understanding that later faded, leaving the concept of Nepenthes as nothing but a poetic metaphor. The search for the real Nepenthes became a botanical detective story spanning generations. Later Greek writers like Theophrastus and Dioscorides scanned the known world for a plant whose properties matched Homer's eerie description. They needed a substance that could induce a profound, peaceful forgetfulness, a gentle erasure of traumatic memory without causing unconsciousness or death. The leading candidate, then as now, was opium. The opium poppy was well known in the ancient Mediterranean. Its latex, harvested from the seed pod, contains morphine and other alkaloids that are powerful analgesics and euphoriants. In moderate doses, it doesn't just numb physical pain, it induces a dreamy, detached state, softening the edges of emotional anguish. A soldier suffering from what we would now call post-traumatic stress, given a carefully measured dose of opium mixed in wine, might indeed find his haunting memories receding, his grief becoming a distant, bearable thing. The fit is compelling, but opium is a sledgehammer. Could the Greeks have refined its use to such a precise, therapeutic degree? This is where the lost manual of Nepenthes begins. The knowledge wasn't just about identifying the poppy. It was about the protocol, the exact preparation and dosage that transformed a dangerous narcotic into a targeted treatment for the soul. Imagine the early Greek healers, perhaps in the centuries just after the Homeric epics were composed. They were navigating a frontier where psyche and soma were not yet separate. They observed that certain plants could alter mood and memory. Their experimentation would have been cautious, empirical, and steeped in ritual. The preparation of a Nepenthes-like remedy was likely a sacred act. The opium latex might be dissolved in aged wine, not just as a solvent, but because the alcohol itself, in combination, created a specific synergistic effect. Perhaps it was blended with other herbs, a touch of mandrake for deeper sedation, or a hint of myrrh as a preservative and for its own soothing aroma to tailor the experience. The most critical lost data is the dosage. How much was a therapeutic dose for a grieving warrior? A single drop too many could plunge a patient into a deadly stupor or an addictive spiral. A dose too small would be useless against the storm of memory. This precision was likely achieved through a system of measured drops, using a specific type of spoon or shell, and calibrated against the patient's size and temperament. The healer would have observed the patient's breathing, the dilation of their eyes, the slackening of their fretful hands. This was a tactile, intimate science of observation, where the herbalist's intuition was as important as the recipe. The administration was equally nuanced. Helen does not force the drink upon her guests. She offers it within a context of safety and hospitality. This points to the lost understanding of set and setting in ancient psychotherapy. The Nepenthes potion was not given in a cold clinic. It was administered in a supportive environment, perhaps accompanied by soothing music, reassuring words, or the comforting presence of the healer. The goal was not to obliterate the self, but to provide a temporary respite, a sheltered harbor where the mind could begin to repair itself without being shredded by recurring traumatic images. The patient might sleep a deep, dreamless sleep and wake with the sharpest edges of their pain filed down, allowing them to speak of their loss without being overwhelmed. This was a form of chemical first aid for the spirit, acknowledging that some memories were wounds that needed to be bandaged before they could heal. Yet this promising thread of knowledge frayed and eventually snapped. As Greek philosophy and medicine became more rational and systematized, the treatment of the mind began to divorce itself from botanical intervention. Philosophers like the Stoics argued that grief should be overcome by reason and willpower, not by a draught. Physicians like Galen focused increasingly on the physical humors, sidelining direct chemical treatments for emotional states. The concept of a plant that could ethically erase memory began to seem like a dangerous fantasy, a crutch for the weak. Nepenthes was gradually relegated from a potential medical reality to a purely literary device, a beautiful symbol for the universal longing to forget. The practical knowledge of how to safely and compassionately use a substance like opium for acute psychological trauma was lost, buried under moral judgment and philosophical debate. We are left with the haunting image from Homer, a queen offering a cup of peace. We have the poppy, but we have forgotten the precise, compassionate recipe that might have once turned its bitter milk into a genuine Nepenthes, leaving us to wonder if the ancients, in their brutal world, had stumbled upon a profound and merciful wisdom that we, with all our modern psychology, are still struggling to relearn. Nepenthes was a solitary cup of forgetfulness, but its loss points to a far greater, more comprehensive silence. With this 30th and final entry, we must step back from the individual plants to see the true scale of the devastation. The greatest loss is not any single root, leaf, or resin. It is the context. For every one of these 30 examples, we have lost the living tapestry of human experience that gave the plant its purpose and power. This is the global loss of ethnobotanical context, the songs, stories, taboos, and daily practices that wove these botanicals into the very fabric of life. A plant used in a sacred ritual was never just a vessel for psychoactive chemicals. It was a node in a vast, humming web of meaning. The blue lotus was not merely an alkaloid, it was the scent of the sun god's rebirth, carried on the chants of priests in a shadowy temple. Silphium was not just a contraceptive, it was a heart-shaped promise of security stamped onto coins and woven into the economic dreams of a city. The Berserker's potion was not a simple toxin. It was the embodiment of the wolf spirit, unleashed by a shaman's chant under a frozen sky. In every case, the plant was one thread in a larger pattern. The pattern was the culture itself, its fears, its hopes, its relationship with the unseen world. And for most of these 30 examples, that pattern has been torn, leaving us with a handful of loose, disconnected threads. We can analyze the chemical composition of a snowdrop bulb and theorize it was Homer's moly. But we cannot hear the specific prayer the healer whispered as she dug it up, believing she was bargaining with a god for protection. We can read a Babylonian prescription that lists Kukru and Burashu, but we cannot feel the solemn dread in the healer's voice as he recited the incantation of E, channeling a god's power into the bitter mixture. That ethnobotanical fabric was the true technology. It was the user manual, written not on parchment but in dance, in melody, in the timing of a harvest moon, and in the shared understanding of a community. It told people not just what to use, but when, how, and most importantly, why. It provided the set and setting that made the experience safe, meaningful, and integrated. Without that context, we are left with raw materials and dangerous questions. This is why attempts to simply revive these plants often fail or become shallow. Someone can brew a psychoactive tea from a recipe, but without the ceremonial container, the fasting, the prayers, the guidance of an elder, the experience is unmoored, a potent chemical event stripped of its navigational wisdom. The plant becomes a drug, not a doorway. The loss of this context is a catastrophe for human understanding. It represents the deletion of thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about how to live in a conscious, reciprocal relationship with the green world. Each lost song, each forgotten taboo about overharvesting, each faded story that explained a plant's origin was a piece of that wisdom. They were the safeguards, the ethical guidelines, and the poetic interpretations that prevented knowledge from becoming mere exploitation. We are left with the skeleton of the ancient pharmacy, but the spirit that animated it, the philosophy that governed its use, has flown. This is the silent echo behind all 30 whispers. We have catalogued the ghosts, but we have lost the language they spoke. The true treasure of the ancient world was not the golden artifact or the secret herb. It was the living conversation between humanity and the leaf, a conversation conducted in a dialect of ritual, reverence, and story that we are only now realizing we have forgotten how to speak. And there we have it, 30 glimpses into a vanished world of green wisdom. From immortality elixirs to warrior potions, these lost knowledges remind us that history is not just about kings and battles, but about the intimate, daily conversation between people and plants. Each story is a testament to a different kind of intelligence, one that read the landscape as a living library and understood that a leaf or a root could be a key to the cosmos, a cure for the heart, or a map of the stars. This journey through forgotten gardens is ultimately a humbling one. It reveals the staggering depth of what has slipped through our fingers, not through some single cataclysm, but through a slow, relentless erosion. The collapse of empires, the silencing of oral traditions, the shift from holistic wisdom to specialized science. We stand amid the fragments, trying to piece together a symphony from a few scattered notes. Yet this exploration is not meant to leave us in despair for the past. It serves as a powerful, urgent call to attention for the present. An incredible amount of botanical wisdom still exists today, held in the minds and practices of indigenous cultures, traditional healers, and local growers around the world. This living knowledge is not a relic. It is a vital, evolving library of resilience containing solutions for medicine, agriculture, and our relationship with the planet. The stories of silphium and the Minoan saffron are cautionary tales. They warn us that when we disregard localized, place-based wisdom in favor of uniformity and short-term gain, we risk losing irreplaceable chapters in the human story. The next great cure, the next drought-resistant crop, or the next profound understanding of consciousness might not be found in a futuristic lab, but in a tradition we are currently allowing to fade. So this is an invitation to listen, to value the grandmother who knows which wild herb settles a stomach, the farmer who saves seeds from a rare, resilient tomato, the community that still sings the songs for the harvest. Their knowledge is the thread that connects us to those 30 lost whispers. It is our turn to be the scribes, not on clay tablets, but through respect, support, and preservation. What lost plant mystery from our journey fascinates you the most? Was it the heart-shaped promise of silphium, the sacred dream tea of the Aztecs, or the golden draught of Soma that opened the gates of heaven? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear which echo from these forgotten gardens resonates with you. And if you want to join more explorations into the hidden corners of history, be sure to subscribe. The past is not silent. It is simply waiting for us to learn how to